We're continuing the Maimer Alpayim Shana Kdama Torah L'Olam that the Rebbe said on the second day of Shavuos Tafshin Yud Aleph. The Maimer speaks about the greatness of Torah and how Torah is above the world. From the saying of the sages in the Medrash, that the Torah preceded the world by 2,000 years. And in the Maimer, the Rebbe quotes the question of the Frierdiker Rebbe in his Maimer, that how can we say 2,000 years before the world, before there was a world, there was no concept of time. And the Rebbe explains the question that no concept of time means that not only there were no tools with which to measure time, more than that, there's no concept of time because when there's no world, the whole idea of time, which is even not just measuring time, but the whole idea of time, that there's a change that makes something either better or worse, doesn't exist because there's no changes. And even more than that, which is the question the Frierdiker Rebbe asks, there is no time at all because time itself was created just as space was created, and therefore there was no time before there was a world. And in this question, and in the Rebbe's expressing what the question is, the meaning of what we're saying, the greatness of Torah. How Torah isn't whatsoever affected by the world because Torah is beyond the world and way above the world. And the explanation that the Frierdiker Rebbe explains is that Alpayim Shana means 2,000 levels, or more precisely, the idea of Alpayim is 2 times Aleph, Alepcha Chachma and Alepcha Bina. I will teach you wisdom and I will teach you understanding, which is the idea of Moichin, intellect, that is above Midas. The world was created through Midas, through the measured paths of energy, so the measured channels of energy that are called Midas, the attributes. And just like the difference between emotional attributes in a person, and in emotional attributes and intellectual attributes in a person, that the difference between emotion and intellect is that emotion is for others, emotion connects to others, whereas intellect is something that a person has for themselves. It doesn't connect whatsoever to others. And in the same way, whilst the world was created through Midas, the emotional attributes, that the 7, what we call the Shivas Yemei Binyan, the 7 days of building the world, which means the 7 Sheishes Yomim Asa Havaya. First Hashem made 6 days, which are 6 channels, and then He made Shamayim and Aretz, the spiritual and physical worlds. Whereas Torah comes from the intellectual aspect, that's above the world and beyond the world. Now the Rebbe asks a question. When the sages want to tell us the greatness of Torah, why do they start in the Pasuk? The first thing the Pasuk says in Mishlei, that Shlomo HaMelech is describing Torah's greatness and the closeness that Torah has to Hashem even from before the creation of the world. And he starts with the words, V'eya etzloi emun. I was for Hashem an emun, which the simple literal translation means greatness. Only later in the Pasuk does it talk about V'eya etzloi shashuim yoim yoim. I was a pleasure with which Hashem took pleasure day and day, which that's what the Chazal explained means day and day, the 2 days, which is the two days of Hashem, which the day of Hashem is 1,000 years, that's the 2,000 years. And the question is, why do we start from something that comes later in the Pasuk, which obviously shows that it's only a lower, it's a different type of greatness of Torah. If the Chazal want to speak about the greatness of Torah, speak about the first thing, Vayetz Le'emun. Another question is, why in the pasuk does it say "Va'eya I will be," something that talks about the future? If we're talking about something that was even before the creation of the world, it should be something that speaks in a way of talking about the past. It was. Moreover, even in the saying of Chazal, which is even much later, in the time of the Amoraim, pasuk is a pasuk in Torah. It's nevertheless said by Shlomo Melech and Mishlei. But here's something when the Amoraim, the sages of the Gemara, are speaking about the greatness of Torah, they quote the pasuk, "Va'eya I will be." Already in the time of the Amoraim, they're talking about the greatness of Torah that superseded the creation of the world, and they say, "Va'eya I will be." Now, seemingly one can explain that in diktuk, in Hebrew grammar, when it says a vav, often the vav changes something which is in future tense into past tense. The Rebbe says that may be true, but according to the Zohar, it's clear that this pasuk, Va'eya, is talking about the future, and the Zohar says that it's talking about Ana Asiv Lizgalia. Hashem is speaking about things which will be revealed in the future. The question is, why specifically do we say that this greatness of Torah is something which will be revealed only in the future? Meaning that there's something about it that is so great and so powerful that it can only be revealed in the future in the time of Mashiach. Now, regarding the earlier question of why we're starting from Shashuim Yoim Yoim rather than Emun, so the Rebbe talks about a very interesting concept over here. So even though it's in the question, but it's a very interesting concept which also explains the greatness of Torah in relation to the world. Seemingly, one could explain that the idea of Emun, we know that the Chazal, the sages tell us that the word Emun also comes from the word Uman, which means a tool used for building. And that the Torah is saying, "Va'eya etzli Emun aniya yisi kleyum nasei shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'vriyas ha'olam." The Torah is saying that it was the tool that Hashem used in the creation of the world. Now one could explain this idea that therefore Emun is obviously something that's connected to the world, whereas Shashuim Yoim Yoim is the pleasure that Hashem Himself has in Torah that's above the world. In other words, our question is, these great milas of Torah that the pasuk is stating, the greatness of Torah. There's two types of greatness. One is how Torah relates to the world, how Torah relates to the physical world, and one is how Torah is above the world. The final part of the pasuk, which Be'ezus Hashem later on in the Maimer we're going to learn more specifically what each part of the pasuk means. But now just the general idea is that the final part of the pasuk speaks about V'shashua es b'nei Adam. My pleasure of Torah is together with people. That part of the pasuk certainly talks about the Torah, the way it's in the world and the way it affects people. Emun, being the tool with which Hashem created the world, seemingly also is about Torah, how it relates to the world. Whereas Shashuim Yoim Yoim means the pleasure that Hashem had in the Torah for 2 days, meaning 2,000 years before there's a world. Means Torah the way it's above the world, or as we explained it in the Maimer, not in time, but rather in levels, how it's above the world, beyond the entire idea of the world. And this means the following. In the Gemara, it says that David HaMelech, he spoke about the Torah in Tehillim. David HaMelech says, Midos hayu li chukecha beveis migurei. David says to Hashem, your Torah, your laws were songs for me in the place where I was in fear, when I was in fear of my enemies and escaping and running away from them. David HaMelech was constantly running away from his enemies. His life was not such a great life. And he says, "Midos hayu li chukecha." What gave me simcha? What gave me joy? What caused me to be able to feel good nevertheless? What caused me to be able to feel happy despite all my tzaras, despite all the hardships that I went through? Chukecha, your mitzvahs, your Torah. Why? And so Chassidus explains an interesting idea. David HaMelech said, when I would think about the Torah, when I would think about the mitzvahs, and how the entire world, everything, the entire existence of both physical and spiritual worlds, are all dependent on one small point in Torah. If someone were to put on tefillin, and he changes one small iota, the tefillin are not exactly in the right place. If a woman lights Shabbos candles and it's not at exactly the right time, it's 20 minutes too late, it's 1 minute after sunset, then it all doesn't work, and it's all the sustenance that is drawn down into the physical and spiritual worlds isn't there. And sometimes even the opposite. Which means Torah is so exact and the greatness of Torah is so powerful that all the worlds are dependent on one small iota, on one small aspect of Torah. And this, David HaMelech said, caused me joy and pleasure and peace, even as I was running away from my enemies. When I realized the greatness of Torah, how Torah is above the world and how the whole world is dependent on Torah. And it says in the Gemara that David HaMelech was punished. Hashem said to David, "Zmiros karislu." You're calling the Torah songs. You'll see what kind of songs it is. And David was punished that he forgot. When it came to carry the Aron, he forgot that the Torah says the Aron has to be carried on the shoulders by people. And he put it on the wagon, and that caused that one of the Kohen jumped up to try and keep the Aron from falling, Uzzah, and then Uzzah was killed. That was a punishment for what? And that's what Chassidus explains, that why Hashem said to David, that's the greatness of Torah, that the worlds are dependent on it. Torah is beyond and above the world. Torah is an essence on its own. Torah is something that is well beyond the world. That's a concept which is in general brought in Chassidus. Now, based on that concept, that's also the two ideas that we're seeing over here. How are we praising the Torah now? When the Chachamim are talking about, they're talking about Shashuim, Yoim, which is the fact that Torah is above the world. Now we ask the question, why don't we start with the first praise of Torah, which is Emun? And so the Rebbe says, possibly we can explain that Emun, just as the end, Shashua is Bnei Adam, is the praises of Torah, the way Torah relates to the world. Here we're discussing the essence of Torah that's above the world. Which is something that in Mitzvah Hashem in the Maimer we're going to go on and explain which one is greater in true essence. But at the moment the Rebbe explains that Emun, even though it means the tool with which Hashem created the world, it doesn't mean Torah the way it relates to the world. Because what is this tool? There's two aspects to the world. Everything in the world has in it Surah and Chaymer. Chaymer is the matter, the thing itself. Surah is the form, taste, color, size, shape, volume, etc. Every aspect of it. Now the matter, we know, is created with Hashem's word. It's a creation that comes something from nothing. It's the material reality of this creation in the world. The form is a more spiritual thing. It comes through the desires, through the will of Hashem. The fact is that without form, matter is nothing. Torah cannot be anything if it's a tasteless, sizeless, colorless, etc. But the form is the spiritual essence of it. So the Rebbe says now, well, Torah, the Eimun, the tool that Torah is for the form. The spiritual part of it. And therefore it's not something which is related to the world as we know it. It's what gives the world its spiritual form. That's number one. Number two, the Rebbe says even more than that, is that we know that the creation of something from nothing comes only with the power of the essence of Hashem, as we'll explain with Hashem tomorrow. And therefore Torah is that essence that creates, and it's therefore also not related to the physical world. On the contrary, it's the greatest power possible, is Vayetz Li'emun. So we're going to miss Hashem explain that idea more tomorrow, and then therefore the question is asked, why don't we start from that? Why do the Chazal start from Yom Yom?